As the Nazi war machine moved across Europe at the start of World War II, well over 1 million Jewish children were caught in its wake. Approximately 1.5 million of them perished during the war. Many of those that survived did so by going into hiding with the help of networks of individuals working in conjunction with religious, welfare, and resistance organizations. Some children were able to be hidden with family members. Others were separated from loved ones and had to survive in the care of strangers.
My parents were in hiding in probably an attic. They had an argument, and I didn't quite understand what they were saying. My mother, I remember, broke out in tears. The argument that ensued when they had decided they were going to put my brother and I into hiding.
My mother took what was left of our family from over 20, and we traveled to another village, and we lived there with 2 families. My mother and I with one, the Haiduk family, and my aunt and uncle and grandmother with another family across the street. On September 9, 1944, we were awakened by loud yelling and screaming, saying, "Run, the Germans are here." My mother threw on whatever clothes we had handy, and she and I managed to escape to the forest outside the village. We were probably there 2 to 3 weeks. I remember eating berries, and I guess whatever else we could find.
I was interned in the Kovno ghetto, which was the Cohen concentration camp in Kaunas, Lithuania. When my parents saw that the elderly and the children were dispensable, they dug a hole under the barbed wire that was surrounding the ghetto where I could crawl through. On the other side of the barbed wire on the day that I escaped was Bronia Budrekaite. She was my father's secretary, and we ran across that bridge of the Limnos River to her apartment where she hid me for a couple of days.
Some hidden children could pass as non-Jews and hide in the open. In these instances, rescuers created a false narrative, often explaining that a child was illegitimate or a relative visiting from the countryside.
We had to change our name and became another person. My mother was Irene Meunier and I was Ginette Meunier. My father was not my father anymore. It was Henri Mando, because if we were arrested together, we were not together. We didn't try to hide. We just lived in the open, but we became somebody else. We were not supposed to be Jewish.
A constant fear hung over hidden children and their protectors. If suspicions arose, both could be reported to authorities with dire consequences. For this reason, hidden children were often moved between alternate locations and different rescuers.
In my mind's eye, I can visualize about 4 or 5 orphanages that I'd been in. One incident that I do remember, I was in a room and I remember that I was told not to remember any names that might have been said or recall what any of these people look like.
Bronia Budrekaite could not keep me. She was putting herself in great danger, and she found another place for me, which was with Natasha Fugalevichute and Natasha Yegorova. I left them because their neighbor was one of Natasha's brothers, and he was a full-fledged Nazi, and I got whooping cough. He knew that his sister didn't have any children, and I was putting them in danger again. So I was sent to the farm of Lida Goluboviena, who was my third rescuer and my main rescuer. And it was a more idyllic life, a more calm life.
Hidden children were sometimes physically concealed, some for only brief periods of time, others for the entirety of the war. They often had to remain silent for long periods of time.
We stayed Lyon until the end of the war, but I didn't stay with my parents. I went to several little boarding schools because it was not safe for me to be with them. So the Germans started to retaliate, fighting with the resistance. So when my father heard that on the BBC, he wanted me to be out of there, and my mother figured out a way to come and get me. But it was in the same day that 3 German officers decided to come and have dinner with the student. So right away, the headmaster told us, don't come to the dining room, stay in your room upstairs. My room was right above the dining room. And we sat there, we didn't talk, we didn't think, we were silent for about 3 hours.
One day, my mother saw Peter, the son of the Hajduk family, and she went and spoke to him. After dark, some of them came and brought us back to the village, and in their house, they dug a hole. I would say the hole was maybe 4 by 4, maybe 4 by 5. I know that my mother had a hard time stretching out, and she's not very tall. When they could, once a day, they would bring us some food, usually some cold soup, and sometimes a piece of bread. We passed the time, she told me stories, folk tales, Yiddish, Jewish, and in Slovak. And I can't remember this, but I guess we did a lot of counting. I could count to 10,000, I know, when we were free. There was also soldiers living in the homes of the villagers, including the house we were in. So they lived in one room, the Hajduks in another, and we were in the hole.
Even when hidden successfully, many children suffered the trauma of isolation or separation from loved ones, the effects of which could last for years.
Finally, after the war, we go back home and I have my family. But when I think of Monique and Micheline and the rest of the family, my heart aches. Edith, my best friend, all of them go home as orphans. I'm the only one who is lucky enough to have my parents. I will never forget this because it just feels so unfair.
One of the things that is a landmark with survivors is fear and mistrust. And it comes from the fact that we were never sure why people were trying to kill us. So I was always on guard, always stressed about what should I do or shouldn't I do, or should I just be myself? And being myself was a very difficult thing to do in those times.
We had occasional visitors' day at the various orphanages. It was always extremely difficult because I was all by myself. But one day, I remember that so well. One of the boys pointed me out to his relatives. I think it was his mother. And she looked at me and motioned me over. So I came and she talked with me and she offered me some of the stuff that they were having. They were just having fried green beans. No one had ever done that to me. And to this day, I still remember that day. I had dreams occasionally of being reunited with my mother. And occasionally, I even thought that I might have had a brother. All those memories kind of left me. From 4.5 years old, you go another year, and before long, your memories vanish. You have to cope with your new environment. So you can't dwell on the old.
Despite how challenging their experiences or personal ordeals may have been, many hidden children feel gratitude to their rescuers and parents for making the sacrifices that allowed them to survive. I am forever grateful for the Catholic Church,
and the nuns and priests who risked their lives to save the Jewish children under their care. I'm thankful. They saved my life. They saved my brother's life.
It takes, I heard, about 12 or so rescuers to save a child. I'm proof that miracles do happen and that there are good people who risk their lives to save somebody else's life, in this case, mine. I'm fully committed to live my life in gratitude now.
And I think often, too, about all the people who helped me during the war. I would never forget their generosity. I would never forget the courage that they have.
I decided I wanted to find anybody that is still alive from that family that hit us. And one of the things the granddaughter Eva told me, she said, you know, my mother always used to tell me the story about hiding that family. I was young, but I never believed it. I thought she was making it up. My mother always wondered what happened to that little boy. And thanks to the Haiduk family, he had a great life.
I went to an orphanage. I was denounced by the nuns, but the priest saved me within minutes of the time that the Gestapo came to get me. And some other children were rounded up there, and again, my miracle happened.
That February, before we left Paris, my grandfather came to see us. It was the last time I saw him, because he was arrested in 1943, sent to Drancy and then Auschwitz. And I miss him terribly. He was very dear to me.
We were liberated on April 1, 1945. They took us across the street where the other family was hiding my aunt and uncle. Of our family from over 20, 7 survived.
One day, the nuns told me that on the morrow, I would have a visitor come to the orphanage. I thought, maybe it's my mother, I don't know. My brother came over to me and he hugged me, and I hugged him because that's the first time that I realized that I did have a brother and it wasn't just something that I had dreamt of.